today is time for a new video and we're going to talk about cello bows. I've been asked to talk about cello bows by a couple of viewers, so thank you very much for pointing this out that I haven't had a chance to take care of that topic. So we'll discuss bows, but not only bows. We always have to talk about the instrument, and in this particular case very much about the things around it, especially strings and end pins, because those strings and end pins and the evolution of them has been instrumental, pun intended, in changing not only the sound of the cello but also the way you all play it. So I'm not a cellist, so I'm not going to demonstrate anything today. I can fool around a little bit, but no, I'm not going to do that. So we'll keep it a little bit theoretical. I'll give you a little insight into some physics aspects, but nothing complicated. So you will be very, it will be easy for you to follow. So let's begin with the history of the cello. It is not very clear cut out, and we don't know precisely how the cello came into existence. It's a little bit mixed story with a bass violin, which then evolved into both double bass and the cello. So the one getting larger and larger and the other a little bit smaller and smaller again. And we also don't know exactly about the number of strings, well, mostly 4 probably, but the tuning, that's all a little bit in the fog of history still, and needs further research. What we can say is that around 1700, at least 1750, we have something that we can properly call a violoncello. And at the same time, so for everybody to understand, at that time the cello had no end pin, and it was played with gut strings, pure gut strings, maybe with a copper wound lower C string. That is possible, we don't know exactly. Those strings existed, but I'll talk about that more a little later. So no end pin, probably pure gut strings, and a bow that looked very much like a baroque bow, with elbow and curve with a clip and frog. So that was a standard setup. Very unlike from what you play today, and also playing, and also the sound was very different from the cello as you know today. So and then as you may know, the bow evolution started to happen in the late 17th century, and with François-Xavier Tourte around 1800, so those years after the French Revolution, came up with a new bow design that had silver parts on it, and no silver winding yet, but even silver tip plates, and rather strong sticks with a new kind of graduation and curve, and that allowed a stronger playing. It was also around that time that, you know, in those years the Industrial Revolution in England was already happening, and it was slowly new metallurgy spread over Europe, and metals became more widely accessible, be it silver, be it copper. But we should not forget that silver and copper were, back in those years, still very expensive metals, and as you know, they were used for coins, not just as gold. So it was very valuable material, and nobody would have put a copper winding or a silver winding around a string just to throw it away after a year of use. So definitely not. What people did is, when they used copper wound strings, for example, they took off the copper winding after the string was broken, the gut string. So yeah, here we are, gut strings. You probably all play steel strings nowadays. So the upper two strings, A and D, do have a steel core, steel strand, and a metal wound. And the lower two strings, the G and C, are rope core, and again metal wound. What metal? And that makes a huge difference. You probably heard the distinction between, for example, a spiral core regular and the tungsten spiral core. Tungsten is metal, so the spiral core strings or other modern strings, I think the spiral core was the first to apply this. The metal stranded or rope core is first wound with a tungsten wire, a thin tungsten wire. Why is tungsten used? Because it's as heavy as gold. The density of tungsten or gold is like 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter. So that is 19 times the weight of water. Aluminum, for example, is only 2.7. So only 2.7 times the weight of water. Again, tungsten and gold is 19. So depending on what metal you wound on that string, you end up with a very different weight. Why is that so important? Because it changes the tension of the string. When you make a heavier string, you have to tighten it much harder to come to the same tuning. So what you can do when you apply heavy metals on a string, you can make a thinner string, which will vibrate more easy and deliver a more regular overtone range. And at the same time, increase the tension, which means you can play louder. So what also happened in the 19th century is that music went from chambers, rooms, and small concert halls like in palaces into great new build halls in the big cities, where instead of an audience of 50 or 100 people, you all of a sudden you had 1,000 people or even 2,000 people. So you needed to play a lot louder to entertain the people, to make them hear what you play, not only in the first 3 rows, but all the way back to the last row. So making a big noise was the issue at the end of the 19th century. And it coincides with the development of steel. Before the Industrial Revolution, we only had iron, and you could not make a proper string from iron. It would simply break. Iron is way too soft and too brittle, so you have to make steel. Steel is something like a purified iron with a little bit extra carbon. And this is what you play today on your cello. It's steel, it's not iron strings. So coming back to densities or to weight of materials, I need to explain a little further. So if we talk about gut or sheep gut, which is the material, raw material for all strings until about 1900, so the core material, sheep gut has a density of 1.3 only, compared to steel 8, which means 1.3 to 8. The string has to be 3 times as big in diameter, or even 4 times. I would have to calculate that. Don't worry. So significantly thicker than any steel string for the same tension. And such big strings are very hard to play, which is one reason why early cellos were rather taller, with very long strings. So they were not small, but really so big that you would normally play them sitting on the ground. And over time the cello jelly became smaller because it was rather unpractical, and probably also because the tuning went up a little bit. So the first material that could be used for winding strings, of course, were silver and copper. Those metals were used for ages and ages, and they are relatively corrosion resistant, which iron isn't. So it really doesn't make sense to wrap iron around a gut string because it will corrode under your fingers and break. That's completely useless. So you can use silver and copper, especially on the C string, to increase the tension or to narrow down the diameter. And that was probably done, first trial of that, around 1750. But again, what happened then in the Industrial Revolution, for example, was that at the end of the 19th century, electricity was developed, and what you needed to distribute electricity in the big cities of the world, like London, Paris, Berlin, New York, where electrification, is that the right word, began to spread, and replacing gas lamps, for example, in the streets, you needed tons and tons of copper for cables. And this meant that more and more copper was mined and refined, and the prices of copper fell and fell and fell. So it became cheap enough to actually wrap it around strings and make it available for normal players, for normal orchestra players. They were still expensive, so too expensive still for many amateurs. So the professional players and rich people could, at the end of the 19th century, afford gut strings with copper wound, which were copper wound, or a little later, steel core strings with a copper winding. And by that time, the sound of the cello really improved, really became bigger and bigger. A little later, the first nickel wound strings were made. Nickel was very difficult to produce from its metallurgy. It has about the same density of copper and is better corrosion resistant. So that was an alternative. Silver is only a little more heavy than copper. So copper and nickel is at 9 grams per cubic centimeter. Silver is at 10.5. But it's significantly more expensive, so it doesn't make too much sense. Actually, if you have nickel or copper available, you would not necessarily put silver on your string. It was still done a lot on violin strings because it sounds a little sweeter. So, but what does this all have to do with the bows? All right, let's go back to the year 1800. So as I explained, everybody was playing pure gut strings. And the bows at that time were developed for this kind of string, and they're relatively low tension. So there was nothing wrong with those bows at the time, and they could get everything out of the instruments and out of the strings that was in there, sound potentially. But that all changed. That all changed in the around 1900, and it changed again around 1950 when rope core strings were developed and materials like tungsten became available for purposes like this. I'm not exactly sure when the first tungsten wound C string was made. I need to ask Tomastic when that was made. I think they were the first. I would estimate it was 60s or 70s only. Well, all of a sudden, the bow became the weak element in the whole setup. Why is that? Now, if you play on your C string or the G string in fortissimo, you will discover that your bow bottoms out when you play hard enough. All right? Fortissimo. When you play double stops, you'll definitely bottom out. What that does is it spoils the sound, that's one. Number two, it kills the hair because you basically cut off the hair between the stick and the string. You shear it off. Now, if that was a problem, what didn't bowmakers make stronger bows? Well, here's an issue. Everybody was already using Pernambuco. Pernambuco is the strongest wood on this planet. So all you could do to increase the stiffness, the resiliency of the bow further, was to leave more wood on the stick. But that makes the bow more heavy and also tip heavy. And now when you play some light music or some fast passages, that becomes an issue. But still, the weight of the bow went up over the years, gradually. But it had to stay within a limit, because otherwise it would make playing too hard. Okay, now come I. I'm coming from the violin, but it's the same story on the violin or the viola or the double bass. It's always the same story. We have the modern strings, we have the full repertoire going from baroque to very modern playing with all kind of techniques involved, with strong and subtle playing needed. So what I wanted to do is to create a bow that would not bottom out like this on fortissimo or even forte on the lower strings, but be strong enough or stiff enough to withstand that, so you would not shear off the hair between the stick and the strings and the sound being spoiled. And you always fight for the control of the bow, because it goes all over the place under the severe pressure that you need to apply to get to the maximum sound. At the same time, I wanted the bows to be lighter again, because we've lost some of their agility and their liveliness by making them stronger and stronger again. And that renders playing Bach or Haydn or whatever rather difficult, because you have to push around so much weight. While, you know, in Bach's time or at Haydn's time, you were playing with what we call today a baroque bow, the clip-in frog, which was maybe for cello only like 60 grams. And the modern bow had grown into a weight category between 80 and 85 even. We found a very, very good compromise in the weight at around 70 grams. And we did a little of a trick here. We distributed the weight differently. So a little more physics. Okay, watch out. In a wooden bow, most of the weight is in the stick. So the stick is solid. What we do here, when we work with carbon fiber and do it properly, what we can do is can make a hollow stick. And although the stick is almost twice as strong as a wood stick, it's just a very thin tube. It's just got 0.7 millimeter wall thickness. So it's really, really thin, like a couple sheets of paper. So this makes the stick really, really light. But then what we do is we make a solid carbon fiber head and add a rather thick silver tip plate. So this head is 3 times as heavy as a wooden head. So it's really quite a club. And also the heel is more heavy. We have a solid back, we have metal bushings in here, we have a snake wood frog which is heavy. So it's a rather heavy head and a rather heavy heel. But in the middle it's light. And this extended weights offer the stability that you need, for certain off-string bowings, while the weight of the wooden bow is more centered towards the middle. So the bows are significantly lighter, so easier to accelerate or break, and still easier to turn around the strings, but not too light to feel flimsy or, you know, give a feel of fly away. So this is the weight and the stiffness issue. So we were able, with this new design, to address both the stiffness and the weight issue. No, you can't do that with wood. There is no wood available on this planet that can get even close to the properties of carbon fiber. It's also important to understand that not all carbon fiber bows offer this kind of stiffness and stiffness to weight ratio. Actually, no other bows except ours. The reason is there's usually way too much epoxy in the stick, and epoxy is just plastic. And the sound of plastic, I probably don't need to demonstrate to you. It's just dull. It goes off. So, and while carbon fiber rings like glass, or even more so. So the higher the carbon fiber content and the lower the epoxy content, the more resonant the bow will be. The caveat is that it's really difficult to make such a stick, and most companies just don't know how to do it. We do. So, but it doesn't end there. When we started to make our first bows, we discovered rather soon that it's difficult to make one bow that suits every instrument. And in a cello, that's especially true because there are basically two different types and styles of cello. So what we have on the one side is rather dark sounding, large build instruments like Goffrilla, Montagnana models. Very big looking instruments that often have a rather dark sound. Those instruments often need a little brightening up, and there's only so much you can do with the strings, but we can do a little bit with the bow too. So for those kind of instruments, we've developed and improved over all these years the S-series bows. They are our lighter and stiffer bows, and they deliver a very overtone, rich, brilliant sound that helps to sharpen the sound of sometimes a little dull or a little too warm sounding instruments. They are actually our best-selling line of cello bows. We make them with round and octagonal sticks, which offer a little different playing characteristics, but it doesn't do anything to the sound. And then there are those smaller cut cellos, more like the Ruggieri or Stradivari type of instrument. Sometimes they're also a little shorter, but most times they're just more narrow, and that makes the instrument a little harder and brighter in sound. And often the C string is a bit tight or doesn't really isn't so easy to grab, and feels a little stiff. And for that, and the A string's sometimes a little sharp. So for those kind of instruments, we've developed the M series bows. They are a little more flexible, but especially they are several grams heavier, which renders their tuning about one note below the S series bows. And that gives your cello a warm, deep sound. So it's really a question not of your, usually not of preferences, but to match to the right instrument. Then of course they're mid-sized celli, and depending on their arching, on their bass bar, on their selection of wood which is used for the instrument, they can be brighter or darker in sound, and so it's really good to try both different series to find out which ones suit better. But again, that's not the end of the story. There is more. That is our new series of Müsing bows. What's going on here? Since 2007, Pernambuco is on the red list of endangered species and is not allowed to be felled, harvested in the Brazilian Amazonas. No, it's not the Amazonas, it's the Atlantic rainforest. To protect the species. And so it's only a question of time when classical bow making will come to a full stop. Not that we can't make better bows in carbon anyway, but we definitely need a replacement for all the Pernambuco bows that won't be built in the future. And as making an ARCUS bow is a lengthy process and very labor intense, we just can't make them cheaper. It's just not possible. So we were looking for a method, for technology that would allow us to make a bow that sounds at least as good as a good quality Pernambuco bow, but what we can produce at significantly lower cost. And we also meant to target a different player group. While most professional players just love the ARCUS bows for all they can do with it, we meant to develop a new species of bows that are made for the ease of playing. So the idea was, or the question was, can we develop a bow that is easier to play than any other bow ever designed before? Simple answer, yes, we can. What we discovered is that we can make a bow in a seamlessly woven structure with a resin injection process that would deliver the same resonance, the same overtone range and resonance quality as the best Pernambuco. It's not quite as light as an ARCUS bow, it's not quite as stiff, but strong enough to not bottom out in 40. It's not the perfect soloist bow, I have to admit that, but it's even for many amateur players and for students, it's often the better choice actually than an ARCUS bow because it's so much easier to handle. It allows very natural playing. It's a little heavier, they're around 70 to 75 grams depending on the outfit, and actually every little stick is a little different. And they come in a price range significantly below the ARCUS bows. For more details you can go to our website, to the Müsing.eu website, and check them out. And we also introduced a very interesting stainless steel outfit here for the C3 and C4. You should check that out too. So, but this shall be it for a general introduction into the cello bows and why they have to have a new design. They have to be made from new materials to match modern strings, to match modern playing. Oh, this reminds me, I haven't even touched the grounds of the end pin, but I won't now. Maybe I'll talk about that on another day. And explain what again that changes in the way you play. But you know what? Just try to play without an end pin and then put it back on. It's a development also that goes with modern strings. So you will discover that you can apply a lot less force on the strings when you play without an end pin. So again, here's a new generation of bows. Go out, see your shop, get a bunch of these to try and see what they do for you. If you're happy with those bows, let us know. If you're not, let us know, because we always look for ways and for ideas to improve our bows. We're always open to suggestions. Please also put your comments below if you have any wishes or demands, and we'll be happy to reply to all of that. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Bye.